Yeah, welcome everybody to another session with Dr. Donald Martin. So the graduate school application process, the first part we have undergone. So it is the master's admission process in United States, the part 2. And this is a very, very important topic because as last time Dr. Donald Martin explained, the weightage of the GRE and GMAT is going down year by year. And many universities are looking the holistic view of the application process. And that is why this application process, particularly the part 2, is going to be very, very critical. Besides the resume part and other things, we have extracurricular and all is which is discussed. Those who are new joining Dr. Donald Martin, he was the admissions dean at University of Chicago University, Columbia University. Columbia, you may be knowing, is the Ivy League University, and University of Chicago, Booth School of Business. This year, USNEWS has given #1 business school. He was working with Northwestern, Wheaton. And during the career, more than 1,25,000 applications he has evaluated. He has admitted them, and he knows in and out of the admission processes for the undergraduate and graduate, that is bachelor's and master's part of it. He has been extensively traveling to different countries, almost 50 country students he is guiding. He is also a columnist. He has written a great book, The Roadmap to Graduate Study, and a really beautiful 100-page book, 105-page book, and where all his experiences and really great tips. If anybody wants, that is a copy free of cost is available. We will ship it to you free of cost, that book to you. Anybody, please send your address and all those who are interested. And we have been working long, and really we are doing great work. And he has so much expertise. Now, with this basic introduction, I will ask Dr. Donald Martin to take today's topic, which is very, very critical, forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dioris. It is a pleasure to be back with all of you today. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to those who are here for the first time, and to anyone who is returning to join us again. This is a very important webinar presentation today, as all of them have been. And down the road, we'll be reviewing in a future webinar. We're going to review all of what we've covered so far in this particular series. But I'm sure grateful to have you here today. And I trust that by the end of our time together, you will leave this webinar feeling that you've gotten some really helpful, practical, relevant information as you continue to pursue your educational goals. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we talked about some other parts of the application process in our part 1. Today, we're going to cover some additional aspects, perhaps the most important being writing your essays or personal statements. This is absolutely critical. As Dr. Dioris mentioned, the focus on standardized test scores, especially whether it is the GRE, the GMAT, the MCAT, the LSAT. Well, the MCAT and the LSAT, I think, are going to be required continually, at least for the foreseeable future. But the GMAT and the GRE are being required less and less. And I believe that's going to continue over time, so that the essays and what you present in that area will be critical. So today, among other things, I'll be spending the largest portion of my presentation talking about preparing those all-important documents, your personal statements, your essays. I'll be sharing 10 tips with you today that I hope you'll keep in mind as you embark on this very important part of the application. Then we'll be talking about some other things, addressing potential weaknesses. We'll talk about the interview if you have an admissions interview. And then something we're a little ahead of, but I think is very important, and that is what happens if you are placed on a waiting list or are denied. Is that the end of, is it over? It isn't by any stretch, and I'll explain what I mean. So obviously, we're going to start off with one of the areas I cover in every webinar. Those of you who've heard me before, I thank you for going through this with me, but this is too important for me not to cover. And that is the biggest mistake prospective students make at the undergraduate and the graduate level every year. This happens it doesn't need to happen, but it does. So if I were asking you, what do you think is the biggest? Now, there are potential mistakes that applicants make. None of them are deliberate, I would say, but nonetheless, they happen. But if you were to be asked, if I were speaking with you in person, and I said, what is the biggest mistake you believe prospective graduate students make every year? What would you say it is? All right, now that you've formulated that response in your mind, let me tell you my answer. The biggest mistake prospective graduate students make is not doing adequate research when? Before applying, before they apply. This is a huge mistake, and it's you don't have to make it. There's so much information out there. Do you know that one of the wonderful opportunities I've had working with Dr. 𝐸𝐸oris and his team at Astute is to provide lists of possible institutions for Astute clients to consider. And do you know, when I do that, do you know how many options I might provide to just one student for the particular program he or she is considering? Sometimes upwards of 40 or 45, maybe even 50 options, not just 5. So please, when you do your research, remember the perception you have about the institutions you're considering comes after you've taken a close look at them, not beforehand. This is so important. You don't want to start off with a list of 3 schools and that's it. And the only reason you're thinking of them is because of a ranking or someone else told you they were good. I'm not saying that you can't look at rankings or that you shouldn't consider someone's opinion, but this is your education. And in the case of any program, law school, medical school, business school, Master of Arts, Master of Science, PhD, there are incredibly wonderful options, many of them, not just 5. So, whoops, I got a little ahead of myself here. I apologize. So remember, please take time, have a large group of options to begin with, and then you narrow that down to the list of schools you're going to apply. Don't start off with just 4. Give yourself the option of learning about many different programs, when my clients do this, when my own coaching clients take the time to look at their resources and what's out there, they end up sometimes applying to an institution that when they first started out, they hadn't even thought of. So please take the time to do your research. Now, let's move to today's topic. This is the application process part 2. As I mentioned last time we spoke, last month, there are basically 3 parts of your application over which you have the most control. You can determine what is going to happen with these 3 areas, and they are your resume, your recommendation letters, and your personal statements and essays. Now, these 3 areas, you decide what you're going to put on your resume. You decide what is going to go into your personal statement or essays. You decide who it is that is going to recommend you. These are critical parts of the application over which you have the most control. In our session on July 21st, last time, when we talked about the application process, part one, we discussed at length the preparation of a resume and some strategies around choosing the best letter, the best recommenders, and then giving them helpful information to best prepare them to write good letters for you. Today, among other things, as you've seen on our agenda, we're going to spend time talking about that third area over which you have the most control, which is the preparation of your personal statements or essays, whatever they may be called. So with that in mind, let me now begin with 10 tips for preparing your personal statements and essays. Tip number one. This may seem very simplistic, but so many applicants don't do it. You need to allow enough time to prepare your statements. Some individuals are better at writing than others. But in this case, that really doesn't matter. You still need, however well you may write, you need to have time to really focus on what it is you're going to communicate. Don't wait till a week before the deadline and then try to cram getting all of your essays ready. You will invariably make some, what I would consider to be avoidable mistakes when you do that, because you're rushing, you're under stress. In my opinion, you should be working on your essays at least a month or two before the deadline for your application. This is another little tip I'll just put out there. Ideally, if you can get everything else in your application done, you upload your resume, you upload your transcripts and test scores if they're still required. You upload your recommender information. You fill in all of your, name, address, all of this data that they're asking of you well before you apply, so that you can devote the final month or two just to perfecting your essays. If you do that, the chances are you're not going to make unavoidable or avoidable mistakes. You're going to be able to submit excellent essays, which is obviously the goal of what we want for you to be able to do. All right, tip number two. Again, I wish I didn't have to say this, but please follow the directions. What I mean by this is, if you are asked to comment on, maybe they ask you 3 questions in an essay. Why do you want to pursue this program? What do you believe you would contribute to this program if you were admitted and you joined us? And what are your short and long-term goals? If that's what they ask you, answer those questions, but please don't mix them up. Go answer them in the order in which they were asked of you. That's very important, because when you do that, that lets that admissions committee know that you are reading their directions. You don't just prepare one essay and submit that exact same essay to every institution. You need to make sure you are clearly reading the essay prompts. Now, some of the essays will be similar and you can use similar information, but just be careful to answer the questions in the order they were asked for each specific institution. Obviously, make sure you follow the word limit. If you're asked to submit a 500-word essay, seems very simple, but many applicants disregard this requirement, and they'll submit 3 times the number of words they should. If you do that, that lowers your chances of being admitted, because it shows you're not following directions. You're not doing what you're being asked to do. So please do what they ask. Follow those directions. Tip number 3, it might help you to create an outline of what you want to say before you start writing this essay. One thing that can be very helpful is to initially, when you first I'm going to take some water here. My throat, I think I just swallowed one. Hold on. Ah, that's better. Okay. When you read the essay, whatever it is they're asking you, what you want to do first, which can be very helpful, is just write down everything you can think of in bullet points that you might want to say. At this point, it doesn't really matter. You just, whatever comes to mind, write it down. Put it in a bullet point, and then go back and look at those bullet points and start reorganizing them. And maybe you'll take some out, and maybe something else will come to your mind and you'll put it in. And you finally have some bullet points in the order of what you want to say, and then you start writing. This can be very helpful. One of the things this ensures is that you do address everything you were asked to address, that you don't leave something out. If there are 3 questions, 4 questions, 5 in the prompt, make sure in your outline that you are covering all of those by the time you finish writing that essay. This can be very helpful to start off with just a general outline of what you want to say. Tip number 4, if it seems appropriate and it works for you to start off with a quote, let's say, or maybe a story, a personal story, that's very compelling in bringing the reader in to your essay. And that's absolutely fine. Now, if you don't feel you have a quote or a story, you don't have to do that. Many thousands of applicants are admitted who did not use a story or a quote. So please don't hear me saying that you must do this or else you won't be a competitive applicant. No, I'm not saying that. But if you do have something that you might think might draw in the reader a little bit to what you want to say, feel free to use it. Also, if you would like to repeat a question in your essay, if they're saying, what are your short and long-term goals? And you wish to say, my short-term goals include, and my long, you can do that. Or if they ask you, how did you decide to pursue this field of study? You could say, my decision to pursue this field of study began whatever, or was very much influenced by. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with repeating part of a question or all of it if it's germane to the answer that you're going to provide. All right, we're almost halfway through our tips for essays. Remember, who is applying, and maybe more importantly, who is going to be part of this master's program that you're applying for? You are. This is your program. So the admissions committee and the folks reading your application, whose voice should they hear? Your voice. This is very important. And pretend, if you will, it might be helpful. Another thing you could do after you prepare your outline, before you start writing, you could actually talk out loud. Pretend you're talking to the admissions committee and give your answer as an interview answer, and then write. But remember, this is your voice. You need to let them hear you, nobody else, because you're the one that they're evaluating, not your parents, not your teachers, not your advisors, not if you even have an application coach such as myself. When I work with clients, my very, very major commitment is to never detract from their voice. It needs to be your voice that is heard. Here you go. I got ahead of myself. After you complete your first draft, read it out loud to yourself. Read through it just to yourself. Are there any changes you might want to make? Anything along that line? Any changes at all? Number 7, as you evaluate this, of course, please check for spelling and grammar. I wish I didn't have to say this either, but some applicants invariably and perhaps accidentally send in their first draft rather than their final draft. And if an admissions dean, as Dr. DeOris mentioned, I evaluated thousands, tens of thousands of applications in the 28 years that I was a dean of admissions before starting Grad School Roadmap and writing my book. I read thousands of essays, just tens, hundreds of thousands. And when an essay was riddled with errors, spelling errors, grammatical errors, you could tell this was very poorly. This was not the final draft, obviously, but we weren't sure of that. And if that's what was submitted, that's what we evaluated. And many times, if it was bad, that was to the detriment of the applicant. They were denied. So make sure you know that you are checking this very carefully for spelling and grammar. Ask someone else to take a look at your essay. Nothing wrong with that. However, be careful about asking the kind of advice they give, what you're going to accept. Be very careful who you ask. And if you ask too many people, you're going to get a myriad of responses. And remember, I often say family members or friends may not be the best ones to do this because they're a little too close to the situation. They may be well-intentioned, but they just may not be the best. You need someone who can be really objective and take a look at this and give you, it helps to have someone, if you know someone who's had admissions experience, a wealth of background. Dr. DeOris and his team would be wonderful resources. I actually work with them on occasion to evaluate essays for graduate applicants that are working with a student. That's part of the work that I do. That's very good. That's very wise to have someone who has a level of expertise to offer you some insights, but never at the expense of taking away your voice. That is critical. This is also very important. Please make sure you send each essay to the correct destination. I used to get an essay from an applicant at Columbia, and it would say, and that is why Harvard has always been my #1 choice. And if you admit me, I'm going to go there. Well, if that was the case, I denied that applicant because obviously they weren't interested in Columbia and they didn't even take the time to properly organize their essays. So by all means, make sure you are sending the correct essay to the correct destination. And finally, be yourself. Please be yourself. Don't make an assumption that somehow you have to become someone else that you think might be better experienced by the admissions committee, or maybe they'll like you better. No, most of us can tell when somebody is being fake. It just comes through. You can tell. Well, if that's the case with an admissions committee, that isn't going to help you. Make sure you are true to yourself. That is the critical point of this. Oscar Wilde said it best. Everyone else is already taken. So be yourself. Now, before we get to the next part of our agenda, I just wanted to remind you, I love questions, as you may know from those of you who've joined us before. There's a Q&A box on this platform. We already have one question there, which is wonderful. If you have questions about anything I've said or will say, or maybe something I don't say that you would like to ask, please put them in the Q&A section. And when we are finished today, Dr. DeOris will come back and we'll answer any questions you may have. So please, 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 I love questions. There's no dumb question. There's no bad question. If you have one, please ask. Okay. Now let's talk about some potential weaknesses in your application. There could be areas that you're thinking about, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to be very competitive with this particular part of my application. One of the big ones is your grades. Perhaps you did not get the best grades in your undergraduate, or you have maybe a B, an overall, what we would say in the United States, a B average rather than an A. or an A- average. I admitted applicants whose GPAs were very varied. We did not admit everyone who had a 4.0 GPA based on our scale in the United States, or was in the 90th percentile every time. Many of those applicants were denied. The important thing is here that you be able to explain why you believe your grades may not be a realistic reflection of your ability to do graduate level work. Let's say you had a crisis happen during your undergraduate experience. That often affects individuals' grades, or maybe you didn't start out as strongly, but you improved over time. Those are things to let the admissions committee know. That's not going to be the kiss of death. You're not going to be automatically denied, but having an explanation about what you believe contributed to the lower grades is critical and very, very important. Similarly, test scores, if you have to submit them. Some students are better at taking tests than others, and it doesn't have anything to do with their initial level of intelligence. This is why test scores are being used less than they used to be, because the opinion is that they sometimes favor individuals who do better on them over those who don't, but it has nothing to do with academic ability. But if you do have to submit test scores and you believe yours are not quite as good as you wanted, you could say, I took the test 3 times. I did my best. I'm just not the best test taker, but I'd like to show you other things in my application that I believe do speak to my ability to successfully handle graduate level coursework. That is something you can and should do if necessary. A third area, especially right now, that could be important has to do with the area of extracurricular or volunteer activities. This is very important for master's degree applicants, just as it is for undergraduate applicants. You're going to be asked to discuss what it is that you like to do outside of academics. And if there's not much there, it could be because COVID has come in, and obviously many of my own family members who I'm helping this year with their applications, some of them were playing sports in high school or college. All of a sudden, that was stopped. They couldn't do it anymore for 2 years. So if this is your situation, be ready to explain that while you were involved at one point and you want to be again, right now, based on COVID, these things have changed a little bit and you've been affected by that. Perhaps you've had an extended absence from school. Maybe you had to drop out for a period of time. Maybe something happened and you could not complete your undergraduate degree one term after another. Something interfered with that. That's okay. That happened to me twice. It took me 8 years to finish my 4-year bachelor's degree because of some life circumstances that came in and contributed to that. But I did finish, and I got admitted to both my master's and my doctoral. It did not prevent me from getting in, but I did need to explain that to the admissions committee. Lastly, if you have been out of college and you have a gap in your work experience, or you've had several jobs in a very short space of time, things like that you would want to explain. This happens quite often. It's not that there's something necessarily wrong, but if you don't address it, it will lead the admissions committee to wonder, okay, what is going on here with this person? What is the problem? Why is there this gap? Or what were they doing if there's no indication? Or they had 4 jobs in 1 year. In the 12-month period, they had 4 jobs. What is that about? That's a little bit unusual. So if that is your experience, then again, your goal in your application is to kind of, you don't want to go overboard on this. You don't want to be overly concerned about things, but where there could be a realistic question on the part of the admissions committee about something in your application, your goal is to try and answer that question almost before they ask it, so that when they see it, there's an explanation. Oh, okay, this is what happened with this extended absence or the extracurriculars or the grades or whatever it is. There's an explanation. Okay. All right. We've covered two aspects of this main portion of our presentation this morning. Now we're going to move to the third, and that is if you have an interview, the application interview. I want to give you some very, very important tips. First of all, please prepare for this interview. Have a practice session with someone. Go over some questions that you might be asked and have answers ready so that you get to that interview. You're not just going in there thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know what they're going to ask me. Well, you don't in a way, but there are sample questions for many graduate school. Some institutions offer sample questions of what they're going to ask. So prepare. Obviously, please dress appropriately. This is not the time to come in a t-shirt or a pair of shorts. Now, most times, if you're doing a virtual interview, they're going to see you like you're seeing me, from the shoulders up. But you want to be dressed appropriately. Take a look at their instructions. Do they tell you, gentlemen, do you need to wear a tie? Ladies, do they want you to wear a suit, a coat or a jacket instead of just a blouse, let's say? What are they wanting you to do? What is the dress attire? And make sure that you fulfill that. While you're speaking with your interviewer, please use good eye contact. If I were speaking with you today and the entire presentation, I was looking up here, or I was looking over here, I was almost off the screen, and yet I'm talking, how would that come across to you? You would have a very negative impression. Or if I'm looking at you right here, or you're there and I'm looking over here, just no. Now, you don't want to stare at someone like a zombie. No, but you want to establish and maintain good eye contact. That gives the impression of confidence, of the ability to communicate well with that person. So make sure you absolutely demonstrate good eye contact. Please, again, answer the questions you were asked. I know this sounds weird, but sometimes an applicant will be asked something like, tell me about yourself. And they'll say, well, I want to come to your institution to earn a degree. No, we didn't ask you why you want to come to our institution. We asked you to tell us something about yourself. Answer the questions. But in addition, don't ramble. Don't go on and on and on and on for 10 minutes. The more questions the interviewer can ask you, the better. The more they'll have a chance to get to know you. So please answer the questions, but don't ramble. This is wonderful. Speaking of questions, we now have 6 questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to have to really move along here because these questions are increasing, which I love. So keep them coming if you have them. Next point here, very important. Be confident, but not arrogant. There's a big difference, but it's a fine line sometimes, but there's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. You want to be able to talk. If they ask you, what do you believe your accomplishments are? You can tell them. But what you don't do is say, I was the best student in my class and I got the top award. No, you don't. Now, what you can say is, I was very honored when I learned that I was chosen as the best student in my class. You see the difference? You're still telling them, but you're not coming across like you are the best person in the. If you come across arrogantly, that's going to hurt you again as an applicant, big time. Number 6, keep your cool no matter what happens. What if they ask you a question that you don't have an answer for? Now, this doesn't happen too often, but sometimes it does. They may ask you a question you just didn't practice or you didn't. If that happens to you, by the way, what you want to say, you don't want to get all upset and say, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say, or worse yet, try to stumble your way through an answer when you really don't know what it is. If you don't know the answer, tell them that the initial thought is, oh my gosh, that's going to cause me not to be admitted. Absolutely not. That's not true. If you're honest and you tell them, you know, I will have to get back with you. If I can get your contact information, I'll provide that answer for you tomorrow or later today. Do you know what respect that causes in the mind of the interviewer? That you were willing to be honest and not try to pretend you knew. If you try to pretend, you're lying, and they're going to see through that. That's what will cause you to be denied. So keep your cool. If you're talking and all of a sudden you lose your train of thought, or here on our webinars once or twice, the technology has gone bad and I haven't been able to advance my slides. So what do? We stopped, I got back on, and we continued. And if that happens, if the technology goes bad, or you're in the middle of saying something and you forget what you were saying, don't overreact. Just fix it however you need to and move right on. The less attention you give to it, the less attention your interviewer will. Lastly, if you have some questions that you'd like to ask, or I should say, have them ready. Now, you may or may not get a chance to do this depending on the time of the interviewer, but typically you should have some time to ask questions and you don't want to ask too many, 2 or 3 at the most, unless the interviewer continues to say, are there more? Do you have more questions? Do you have more? But have some good questions ready. I talk about this in my book, chapter 2, in the application process, some things to keep in mind. And lastly, always send a thank you note or message to your interviewer. Send a thank you note or message. This is very important. Just thank them for taking the time to meet with you and let them know of your continued interest in the program. This is something that many applicants don't do, and when you do, it may help you stand out just a little bit more. So those are my tips if you are doing an application interview. Now, lastly on the agenda today, what happens if you are waitlisted or you are denied? Let me just preface this by telling you I was denied the first time I applied to Northwestern University for my PhD. I didn't get in. But you know what happened? I requested feedback. I applied a second time. And not only did they admit me the second time, they waived my whole first year of coursework and brought me in as a second-year PhD student, having told me the year before that they couldn't admit me. So what's my advice here? This is not personal. This is, if you are denied or waitlisted, this does not mean that they don't believe you have the potential to do graduate work. There are many other things going on for an admissions dean. There are quotas, there are numbers, there are directions they've been given about the incoming class. So this is nothing to do, there's nothing against you at all. Always request feedback. And if they give it to you, don't argue with them. Just accept the feedback and respond as quickly as you can with what would be an appropriate response. Remember, if you're waitlisted, they're interested. If they didn't think they could admit you, they would deny you. If they put you on a waiting list, that means you're one step closer to being admitted. And if you conduct yourself appropriately, follow the directions, there's a large chance you could get in. But if it doesn't work out, then, as I said, consider reapplying. Your chances of admission when you reapply go up. They don't go down. Many applicants think if they've been denied once, they're going to be denied twice. Absolutely not. That's not true. There's a greater chance of being admitted the second time you apply than there is the first. Okay, we're up to 9 questions. So in closing, a couple of final tips. Then I'm going to talk about my work with Astute. Then I will turn the microphone back over to Dr. Dioris, and we'll take all of your questions. Looks like we have 10 of them now. This is wonderful. I'm glad we're getting some questions. I love it. So my first tip in closing, make sure that you let the admissions committee hear whose voice? Your voice. If you have an admissions coach, helping you with your essay. The worst thing they can do is completely take that essay and turn it into something they would submit. That's a mistake. You want them to help you submit work on your best essay, not theirs. This is your voice. Number two, if you need to discuss something that's less competitive, a weakness, be ready to do it. Remember, you're not alone. Do you know, in all of the years I evaluated all of those thousands of applications, there's no perfect applicant out there. No one has a perfect application, myself included. Nobody. We all have strengths and then liabilities or less competitive components. Everybody does. So please be ready to address that if you need to. Remember, your interview can make or break your application. If you don't establish good eye contact, if you're arrogant, if you look like you're unprepared, if you're not dressed properly, they wouldn't be wanting to interview you if they weren't interested. And you can make or break that depending on how well you conduct yourself in that interview. And lastly, being waitlisted or denied is not the end. It is not over. If you are waitlisted or denied, you still can do this. I'm telling you, I just told you my story. I got denied. If I can do it, so can you. Okay? Lastly, I have had the privilege of working with Dr. 𝐸oris and Astute for over 10 years now. And he never asked me to say this. I truly mean that. He's never asked me to say this. I say it willingly. The Astute team is the best you'll ever find in India. They are absolutely reliable, trustworthy, efficient, and they have great results. And I encourage you, I'm thankful that you are joining us for this webinar today based on the invitation from Astute. I hope you'll continue to work with them. They know what they're doing, believe me. In my work with them, we've had a very high acceptance rate of the applicants that I have helped to Dr. 𝐸oris and his team to work with. We can mentor. If you are looking for a mentoring opportunity, we can start that as early as your freshman year in college to help you prepare in terms of your major, to think about what would be most helpful on your resume, how to really begin preparing for grad school. If that's of interest, we're here to help. Obviously, we can assist with school search. As I mentioned before, I do that often. Resume prep, essays, recommender strategy, any of it. We are more than willing and able to help as we can. Okay. Lastly, before I turn the mic back over to Dr. 𝐸oris, I just want you to know how much I wish you every success in your educational and professional career. Graduate school changed my life. It really did. I don't know where I would be without the two wonderful graduate experiences that I had. So I wish the same for you. And to that end now, what are your questions? What can we answer? We've got, it looks like we have 15 questions, 16 now. This is wonderful. And so with that, I'm going to stop for right now, at least stop with my presentation. I'm going to ask Dr. 𝐸oris to come back and we will answer all of the questions that we can for you. Thank you for joining us and for listening in now as we discuss your questions. Dr. 𝐸oris?
Yeah, thank you very much. Really excellent session as usual, and really appreciate so much of the depth. Before I take the question, I just wanted to tell you on the 8th of August, we are going to cover very important topic on the financial part of it, the scholarships and other financial part, which we combined the undergraduate and graduate. So please do join. So that is, there is some slight change in the schedule. So let's come to the question.
Okay.
Question, is there any difference between the bachelor and the master's essay writing level?
Yes and no. That's a good question. I would answer that yes and no. The quality of your essays is the same. That there is no difference there. You need to spend time preparing excellent essays for your undergraduate or your graduate application. Perhaps a difference would be the types of essays you'll be addressing. Many times for the undergraduate level, for those of you who went through this when you were undergrads, you may have completed what's called a common application. You had one basic essay that you prepared and you sent that in to all of the schools you were thinking about. At the graduate level, there is no common application. There are individual applications for each program, and as such, the types of essays you'll be asked could vary. But in terms of taking the time to complete them and doing a good job in answering them, checking them, all of that, that is all the same. Very good question.
Is a proof or a certificate of awards required for extracurricular activities which we are mentioning in the application? So whatever we mention in the application, do we need to provide a proof or certificates?
You do not have to provide a certificate of proof. If you would like to, especially let's say that you were given an award as the result of your extracurricular. Perhaps you were given Athlete of the Year, or you won a debate team competition, and there was an award that you have a certificate to show that. You can definitely use that if you would like, but you don't have to. You simply would provide on your resume or where appropriately asked in an essay what some of these recognitions were or some of your activities. Very good question.
Yeah. I'll just add one more line to that. Whatever you write into that, even though the certificates are not required, but there has to be genuinity into that. Whatever work you have not done or what not completed, you should not be mentioning there just because it will add value to your application. Genuine and be yourself, and 100% factual application is a need of the hour.
Thank you. Excellent. That's excellent advice.
Another question is GPA versus work experience weightage in the grad school resume.
Well, basically, you want to feature all that you can in terms of your academic and professional background on your resume. And then depending on what that includes, then the admissions committee will evaluate it accordingly. I will say that professional experience, if you have it, certainly can help your application, because you now have not only attained an undergraduate degree, but on top of that, you've had some work experience. Now, and in the case of some programs, for instance, an MBA, you must have work experience. They will not evaluate you for an MBA if you're just coming out of college. You must have at least 2 or 3 years of full-time work experience before the MBA. So you should check the requirements, obviously, for the program you're applying to, and where you have adequate and useful professional experience, by all means, put that on your resume along with. But if you don't have work experience and it is not required for a particular graduate degree, that's fine as well.
Yeah. When should one expect the grad interviews? At what stage of the application process the interviews are there?
Good, great question. In years gone by, many graduate schools allowed applicants to have an interview before they apply. Some of them still do. And if that is the case, you will see that information provided on the admissions website. They will say under interviews, please, if you would like to do an interview, please click this box, or please email this address, or call us, or whatever. They will give you the information to do that. Many graduate schools have now moved to a different approach, and that is they decide who they want to interview after the applications have been submitted. They contact you and say, we've received your application, we would like to schedule an interview with you. Please know that not in every case does it mean that if you didn't get an interview invitation, you're not going to be admitted. In some cases, that is true, but not all. There are applicants who don't interview who get admitted, and there are applicants who interview that don't get admitted. So there's still some cases where you would have a chance to do an interview before you apply. More likely now, it would be after you've submitted your application that you would receive the invitation. That information should be provided very clearly by each graduate program on their admissions website.
Is the application viewed in negative light if the person does not have the experience of job or maybe a gap after the bachelor's degree?
Okay, good question. Let me take the gap first. If you have a gap after your undergraduate education, before you are applying for a master's, that could be for a very good reason. Some applicants take some time off after college to travel. They want to travel for a year, or they will work with a volunteer organization like the Peace Corps, or teach for, in the United States, we have something called Teach for America, where a student will become a volunteer teacher for 2 years in an inner city that needs help. It's a volunteer thing. They do this for 2 years after college. That's a gap. There are many reasons to take some time off other than working. And so, no, if you have a gap and there's some really exciting things you've done, no problem. If you don't have work experience at all, and the program doesn't require that, no problem. If you do have work experience, even if the program doesn't require it, that's okay too. It's more often than not that your credentials match what the admissions committee is saying you absolutely have to have in order to apply. So if that's an undergraduate degree and some work experience, then you would need to have that. But if not, your level of work experience can help you, but it's not a detriment if they don't require it and you don't have it.
Yeah, that's great. Another question, can the answer be the same in personal statement and the interview? If the same questions are there in personal statement and our answer can be same.
That's a great question. Absolutely, yes. Your answer, if the question is the same, there's no reason that you wouldn't answer it the same. Now, let me say this, however, this is a little bit of a different angle on this question. Please do not memorize your answers for an interview. Do not treat this as a script and you go through, because if you do and you recite an essay or you recite a response that is so totally memorized, you lose your ability to be authentic and real, and just don't have an idea of what you want to say when you answer the question, but don't answer it verbatim as you did in your essay if it's the same question. It can be, so in other words, yes, provide the same information, but you want your responses in the interview to be conversational. You don't, just like these questions that Dr. Dioris is asking me. If Dr. Dioris were to say, Don, can you answer the same information in an essay and an interview? And I said, that is a very good question. I am so glad you asked. You're going to know I'm reading something. That you don't want to do. But you should answer this, give the same information if the same question is asked. I hope that makes sense.
What if we don't perform well in interview? Can we request for reconsideration?
These are, again, Tushar, your audience always asks they really do ask excellent questions. That's a tough question to answer because there could be some instances where you might consider asking for another interview or letting the director of admissions know what happened. If you believe that you just somehow didn't do the best you could have, and if you were ready, it just, something was, you were sick, you had a car accident right beforehand, and if some sort of extenuating circumstance caused you to do less than you hoped, yes, you could reach out and let them know this is truly what happened. Here's some, don't make it up. Please don't make it up, but have a doctor's report, have a police report, have something to show them. Here's what was going on during this time. I didn't feel that I should cancel, but I really believe I didn't do my best. That's one instance where you could ask for reconsideration, that you could you reschedule the interview? If there's something that happened that you had no control over that definitely impacted your ability to perform as well as you wanted, yes, I think it would be appropriate to ask for reconsideration.
Another question, how to ask a question or more clarification regarding the program to admissions committee?
I believe what this applicant is wanting to know is what would be the appropriate way to ask questions about the program.
Yes, so he wants more information about the program. So where the clarification before he applies.
Good question. First of all, obviously, you do not want to ask questions you can answer for yourself. If the information's already there, do not ask that question. For instance, if they provide their deadlines, don't ask them what their deadlines are. If they give you information on what financial aid they provide, don't ask them what kind of financial aid they provide. But if you've been looking into the program and there's a question that comes to your mind that isn't answered anywhere, then you can send an email to the admissions contact, and you can say, I've been reading about this program or this student activity or this career preparation activity, and I have some more questions about it, and here are my questions. I'd appreciate, if you could provide your responses, something like that. That would be appropriate to reach out but it should be based on the fact that you've already been doing some research of your own. That's the part you've already done some homework. Now you're trying to fill in some of the information you've discovered. By the way, if any of you have questions about any of this afterward, please feel free to ask to Dr. Diores or myself. Obviously, happy to respond further.
Is it okay to refer sample essays?
Is it okay to refer sample? I'm not sure what that means, Diores.
Yeah, means on the internet we search what are how the essays, personal statements are written.
Oh,
and try to refer those essays onto so many things are flying. And
I see. Okay. I'm a little suspicious, to be honest, about doing a lot of research regarding samples. I don't think it's a total waste of time, but in my opinion, essays are much better when they are written by the applicant himself or herself initially. Now, if look at the tips that I gave you today for your essays. I gave you 10 tips for preparing your essays. Maybe I missed something. I'm sure there could be others, but to me, those are the main things you need to keep in mind when writing your essays. What you don't need to do is do some incredibly lengthy internet search on every sample you can think of. That makes it harder, I believe, to do your best work. So it's a resource you could possibly use, but I wouldn't suggest you overdo it.
Should I mention about the GRE scores also in the essays?
The only time I would suggest mentioning lower test scores is if you don't have another place to do that. And what I mean by that is many applications, especially graduate school applications, they will include what's called an optional or additional information question, where you're asked, they'll say, is there anything else you would like to provide to us about your application? They might even say, is there anything about your grades or test scores you would like us to know? If they ask that, that's the place to put it. If they don't, then yes, you could put it in a regular essay, kind of at the conclusion, if you would like to do that. Yes.
Another question, what are the skills and qualities are tested during interview?
Good question. I think what basically is being assessed is, first of all, the credibility of the applicant. Do the answers that are asked about their background match what they've already said in the application? Is there continuity? Are they presenting a persuasive argument for being admitted? Do they know about the program? Have they done their research? And how well do they communicate? Do they use good eye contact? Do they answer questions comfortably? Now, we recognize that applicants are going to be nervous, especially at the very beginning of the interview, obviously. But as they go through, do they calm down? Are they relatively at ease communicating? Those are some of the things that are being assessed as the interviewee is answering the questions of the interviewer.
Yeah, another question. Can you write your essays in other language other than English?
No. Well, you can write them if initially in your native language. It would be easier for you to do that. But then at some point, you will need to have them translated into English for submission to the graduate school. But if you want to start out, if it would be easier for you to get your thoughts on paper in the best way that you know how, using your native language, by all means, you should feel free to start that way.
If I got one university which is not my initial choice, is there any way I can try for better university in future?
Not really. Now, I'm not sure if you were asking this part of the question, but let's say you got into a good university, but not your first choice, which may have been even a better university in your mind. They denied you, but the other university admitted you. You could decide to wait a year and reapply to the other university. And in the process of doing so, try to find out what may have contributed to that decision not to admit you to that number one choice. And when you reapply, let them know that you were admitted elsewhere, but you chose to wait because they're your number one choice. But I also want to say, I am a firm believer that things work out the way they're meant to. And in some cases, if you get into a second choice or even third choice institution and you spend time getting to know them better, maybe you'll have a chance to visit the campus. There are occasions, many occasions, where students got there and thought, oh my word, this is better than I thought. I'm going to go there. So don't automatically rule out that admission offer. But if after all that you've researched, everything you've thought about, you want to wait a year and try again, you should feel free to do that.
How to answer common graduate school interview questions like express self, personality, and career aspirations. This type of generic questions, how you should be answering.
Almost all the questions you're going to be asked in that interview would be considered general interview questions because they're being asked of everyone, not just you. So where the uniqueness comes in is your answer to those questions based on, if someone asks you, tell me about what you're like, how would you describe your personality? Well, how would you? That's the question. There's no right or wrong answer there. What you describe should be unique to you. And that's what what are your short and long-term goals? Well, what are they? As I said, if you do a practice interview with someone, as you prepare, practice your answers. Don't memorize them now, but practice them. You simply need to be, this is your chance to let you shine, just you. And remember this, when there's no right or wrong answer in an interview, really, unless you yell at someone or you use bad language, or I mean, obviously that would be terrible. But in terms of providing, they don't have a checklist on their side. They're not saying, oh, he said this about his personality. Oh, she said that about her long-term goal. No. They just want to hear from you. So let them hear from you. It's whatever you want to tell them. That's the important thing for each of those more general questions, which everybody will be asked.
Are there any essays for scholarship applications?
Yes, there are. And if that is the case, in the application instructions, there will be information about applying for certain scholarships that come along with certain educational programs. And yes, you will be asked to complete an essay for those, or for many of those. Now, it could be similar to an essay you've already written. It may not be brand new, but yes, you may have some essay submissions for scholarships. We'll talk a little more about that particular part as of many things we'll discuss this coming Monday when I give my presentation for the undergraduate and graduate school students on financial aid.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. What should we answer if they ask, why should we admit you this time if you were denied the last time?
Good question. Well, I don't want to tell you what to say. That should be in your own answer, your own words. But let me tell you some things that you could think about saying. First of all, if this is your first choice, then this is the time to tell them, I'm applying again because this is my first choice institution. And if it's true, you could say, I had offers last time, but I turned them down because I'm so committed. And then you could say, this is what I'm so drawn to in your program. This is, and I believe I'm a good match. I believe I can bring to the table what you're looking for in these elements. And then one other thing you could say is, I've also tried to improve my candidacy. I retook my GRE. I've taken an extra 2 classes. I've done some additional extracurricular or volunteer work. I've tried to really improve myself in this time. Those are some of the things you would mention if being asked why they should now consider you this second time.
Yeah, that's great. And I think this is so great advice. And in fact, I'm learning every time when I interact with Dr. Donald Martin. It's a new perspective, and in last 10 years I have learned a lot from Dr. Donald Martin. And every session is so great session and so much of an insight, and that is coming from a personal experience. Please understand, and you will not get such advice anywhere on the internet or anywhere. So really, thank you very much, Dr. Donald Martin, for such a wonderful session which we are doing. I hope students will definitely see a value into the whatever presentations you are giving, the webinars, and most critical, the questions and answers. And thank you very much, all the participants, students, and the teachers who have joined this. And we'll be seeing you again on the 8th, same time on the 8th of August on Monday. Thank you very much.